Let's rewind to the summer of 1975. Life in America was certainly simpler than today. Home phones were rotary and screwed into kitchen walls. Milkmen still left morning deliveries of bottles at people's front doors. Instead of smartphones, people enjoyed reading comics in their daily newspapers while having a morning coffee. A bit of calm had just arrived at the end of the Vietnam War. It was just a few months before. At the movies, everybody headed to see some newfangled action movie called Jaws by a budding director named Steven Spielberg. Hello everyone and welcome. In this video, we're going to look at the Lion's Share Treasure, Chapter 1. It is called the 120 Carat Sapphire. A plan that changed the world is the description or subtitle. There are two quotes. It takes as much energy to wish as it does to plan, by Eleanor Roosevelt. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Mary Oliver. To start off, let's do a chapter summary. This chapter first starts with some of John Colin Black's life, and he introduces kind of his son at a young age, making maps, and then compares it to having the importance to a plan. Then he talks about Apple's early days, and that's the computer company, and the success with the plan they made. Mike Scott, one of the first founders, then is transitioned into his gem collection, and there's one that's known as a dazzling cobalt blue mineral named Scottite. Then there references the six-sided crystalline form, which is rare. The 120 carat sapphire crystal is much rarer still, and kind of shows that treasure. Now, two things from that is that there's nothing rare or well-planned that just happened out of nowhere. Second, that you need to have a plan in order to get everything into focus. He kind of then goes back from all of this apple and then the crystals and then this plan to his children. He does talk about how, for him, one of the biggest lessons is the kindness, generosity, and integrity. Finally, he then kind of ties it all together by referencing his son and Wozniak, showing that the first step is a plan. And I'll do a more direct quote later on. I should also mention it at the very end of the chapter, which kind of seems like what he does in each one. So he has a paragraph or sentences that kind of show what the next chapter is going to be about, which is not winging it for this case for chapter 2. But let's keep going. One thing that I found kind of interesting in this is they talked about Mike Scott, and they talked about the founders, two of them, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Now, if you look into it more, just Google search it, there's actually three people. There's Ronald Wayne as well, and he wasn't really talked about. Well, he wasn't talked about at all in this, which I found interesting. Not to say that Ronald Wayne is someone that has something to do with this treasure, but it was just intriguing that in this chapter, talking about a well thought out plan, they didn't reference him at all. Someone who's a founder, and perhaps just saying, well, there's an unfortunate thing that he sold his 10% Apple stake for just $800. Now it would be worth billions, if not more. It was interesting that it wasn't referenced at all. Do with it as you will. I'm sure others have already kind of looked into that. Thought it was interesting. Now, some Spidey Senses that I thought were pretty important, I pulled and put here. First, when talking about his son, the toddler had already figured out the first critical step to acquire something we desire. And in this treasure hunt book, of course, the treasure, you need to have a roadmap. To continue this, too, he just pretty much blatantly states, if you want to find the sapphire and other treasures, you need to think of these pages as your map. They offer a place to start, directions to follow, and ultimately a destination at which to arrive. As you encounter stories or ideas you feel could define from, write them down, draw them out, and organize them. And sometimes it takes a while for the whole plan to come to fully into focus. But the same holds true with most things we pursue. Without a roadmap, It is easy to aimlessly wander. So he calls out a roadmap a couple times here. At the very end, when he was tying together his son and Mike Scott, he says the first step in treasure hunting is to formulate a map, and the likely second step is to ready ourselves as much as possible to put our planning into action. To me, this is kind of like an easy, blatantly obvious chapter talking about you need to have a roadmap, a plan, and that's the first step. And even the second step is taking that plan or roadmap and then putting it into action, readying yourself and organizing, writing it down. It just seems like this is John Collins Black telling you what to do. Again, it makes sense, the plan. And it seems to make sense and tie into that kind of subtitle as well of planning. But here it just seems spelled out. Now, looking at images, there is some different debate and things. In any case, first off, there are kind of these two main ones that were back to back. And first off, it's the actor, I think James Doohan, from Scotty from Star Trek, and from Getty Images, I found pretty much an exact replica. I didn't notice anything different outside of the bottom, like, kind of tears in it. And then secondly, there are these treasure images in a black background. And it had a title thing that said the image in red shows what our sapphire appears like under ultraviolet light. So again, there's a kind of reference to the light theme, if there is an overarching one, and then just kind of a couple of colors there. And one thing to note with this tear is that it does appear 3 times from what I see in the book. This chapter 1, page 23, chapter 21, page 185, and then part 2, 219, which is a frog, provided that you spin it 90 degrees. And all of those have kind of that identical kind of shape. I blew it up here and then just kind of darkened it so you get a better outline of it. And I didn't notice anything that it looked like specifically. However, I wanted to at least put it out there and a couple of examples of what it could be, but also not an exhaustive list. Now, first, Canva, which is a photo and video editing software. It is what I'm using with these, presentations, is you can use something called a frame. Now, a frame here is just basically an image that's going to look like that shape. So you take a photo, put it into the frame, you will essentially have the photo shown in that, and you can kind of drag it around and mark it. This seems like what John is doing is putting it into a frame. Now, I didn't find this one exactly in Canva. It seems like he's using some sort of Adobe Photoshop or another one, and I didn't really see one for a template either anywhere. I did find 2 that you can kind of create your own, like, torn paper effect. And here's kind of a link if you wanted to kind of see it and how it's done. But ultimately, this is something that could just be a template that he's just sticking it in and uses it, 3-ish times, maybe more. If you find something, leave it in a comment if you know another page. Or he's doing it intentionally, that this is some sort of path or kind of outline or whatever. Now, the other thing is a potential red herring. A red herring, if you haven't heard, is essentially something that is just basically there to trick you, or just you find it, but it doesn't mean anything. There's even an app called Red Herring, which I think is like this kind of puzzle game where you're supposed to find like things that match up together. Like a category might be color, but then there might be another one that's like, fruit. So orange might be there, and you'd have to decide, is it supposed to be in the colors or is it supposed to be in the fruit? And then with all the options, you kind of sort them. In any case, I don't think that's part of it, but it's interesting. For this one, it's kind of going back to, it's talking about those UV lights. And if you shine a light, you essentially get this. Now, this is from the ebook, and wanted to at least put it out there that you can do that pretty easily, like in a software like this, where you just kind of make one translucent, and then you can see it. You do have to flip it as well, just as like a page when you flip it, one would be backwards to it. What happens is if you shine a light or do this, you can kind of see this fish-like shape. This was recently shown, and honestly the first time that I heard of it, from Cowlazar. They have a Discord. You can look it in my description. And they got this from a Justin. You can look at that further for kind of their stuff. It was interesting. And to me, there's a few things. One, JCB might be using layouts like this intentionally. I think if you look through it, some of the parts, the spacing of the words are just like more condensed or more spacious. And it seems intentional how he has the words placed. Just like this, could be that he's spacing it for clues like this. Second, it could be that other images that are already made, as I already mentioned, this one, could be in play for some of the puzzles. What I mean is he took this kind of image of the crystal, maybe put it in an intentional way with an already made image like this in order to make something like a red herring. Now, red herring in of itself is saying, don't go this route because this isn't going to be something. Again, could be an Easter egg, could totally just be a coincidence too. If you looked at a previous video, I did mention that if you put the X to the cover, it does make the side quest out. And so this kind of seems like something that might be together. Another idea that this could also play into is like with the Appalachian Trail, it has the compass on it to the cover. And so you can put the cover over it. And even when you do that, there's that little fake map that's on the cover of the book. And so what if he used that already made cover map to be part of the clue for the Appalachian Trail? It is in the ebook, so it seems like it should be fair game with that, just because it's in, every copy that he's sold. And so what if he, used something that was pre-made like that, similar to this image, to do that? Again, I think it's kind of a grasp, but it's interesting that, the images he uses seems to be intentional, but it might not be. Either way, I think we can all agree that image is a bit fishy. Now, this is for Jonerisms, and there really isn't one that's like too crazy like that. I did insert the quote at the very start of this video about the milkman, and that seems like something, but there wasn't anything as crazy as like the introduction and things like that seemed like that way. So, nothing of note in my mind. If you think there's one that you would, feel free. I think there are definitely some clues in there, but again. Now, the biggest thing in this, I think, is the roadmap aspect and steps. He specifically calls out the first step would be to create a roadmap. This title is a plan that changed the world. Second, he said the second obvious step, whatever, would be readying ourselves as much as possible to put our planning into action. It would be the opposite of winging it. This seems that he's putting out that there are two or more. I mean, I assume there's more steps than that. Later on, perhaps he's referencing that there should be 7 actions or 7 steps. Like he was saying, there's 7 actions to open this lion's share treasure box. Perhaps there's 7 actions or steps for the solve of it. I think finding a treasure box or 2 would really confirm if the descriptions of each treasure box has to do with the puzzles or not. But that's something that I find interesting. Now, he's giving 2 out in the first chapter, so it's kind of like, what about the other 22 chapters? They're not going to, is it just a slower pace? And maybe the first one is to give you some pretty obvious clues like this, and then going on. I just found it interesting, and that's kind of a idea of what if in my mind. Now, he talks about the roadmap, and so I figured let's start and make a map. So for chapter 1, there were 2 states that I saw obviously mentioned, and there's a lot of references to California and one to Oregon. When the Oregon one was when he talked about the fruit orchard in Oregon, that's how they got the name Apple. So those are the 2 locations mentioned so far. maybe there is a map that goes through it, he said, and use these pages as a map because they ask for a place to start. Perhaps you start in California, directions to follow, and then ultimately a destination to arrive. Maybe this whole thing is going to be a start to end, so I figured each chapter just kind of line it and go through. I will have a spreadsheet that will reference these ones that I find. Please, if you have other ones that you would want to, you think add or something I missed, you can leave it in the comments. I'd love to hear from that. And ultimately, I go back and forth on should I reference things that are clearly the state, like if they say state or a city, or if like some of the references that only are in there. Like, for example, if you do a sports team that you know would be in a state, would that count as a reference to the state? And I go back and forth on which one. For now, I'm just kind of doing those, and some of them I'll kind of maybe highlight in each chapter. But this one was pretty cut and dry, these two states. The other thing is timelines. I thought it was interesting that he usually has a story or anecdote of his life and then kind of a story or like a historical event. And so here he referenced a 3.5-year-old son, well, his son, and then in chapter 1 talked about Apple, which kind of primarily went in the 70s and early 80s. And so, you know, his stories are all over in history as well, but wanted to at least start a timeline, and hopefully I can expound upon it. Might get a little bit cluttered, but going to try it. And this is new to me, so we'll see if there's anything that kind of comes up with the timeline part. But again, it's kind of the things that I'm looking at. Summary 1. The biggest thing is that the step 1 is to solve, is to have a roadmap plan. We're instructed to make a roadmap, as all important things don't happen without planning. It seems to imply that the next step is to be putting a plan into action. Don't wing it. It's the next chapter, so that seems like a good way to kind of transition or segue into that. Possibly showing image overlays and light could be a component of this, or as a red herring might imply, to not do it because there's nothing in it. Finally, California and Oregon are mentioned, and you know, that might be the start of our roadmap plan, the beginning. So there's of course other things that could be mentioned too. Obviously the video is longer than just these things, but hopefully this is helpful to you and you are planning. If you have other things, I'd love to hear it in the comments. I'll have an email down there too if you want to email me stuff. I'll do my best to respond. I typically check like once or twice a week, so please allow a little bit of time before responses. But in any case, thank you for your views, comments, interactions, all of that. Push that button to subscribe to if you want to continue to get content and know when it releases. I will be doing these monthly on the 12th, and I'm hoping to do 2. If I do a second one, it would be on the 21st. Just being referencing when the book was supposed to be out, October 21st, and when it actually came out, November 12th. So the 12th always, the 21st sometimes. I can tell you that this month I will not be doing a second one because it is very busy right now for me. But other ones, hopefully I will be able to when I kind of catch up a little bit. And yeah, anyway, thank you again for watching. Do those social things, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye now.